All right, for those of you just joining us, we have the opportunity to hear from Tom Terry, president of the Terry Group. And again, as a reminder for those of you that are with us live today, if you have questions you'd like Tom to address, please feel free to put those in the Q&A panel on your screen. Tom, I want to talk a little bit about the actuarial profession in general. You've obviously seen a lot during your career, both locally in the U.S. as well as internationally. Where do you see opportunities for actuaries going forward?
Wow, I mean, just about everywhere. You know, I'm perhaps not the best one to answer that question, only because I've trained myself to look for opportunities everywhere. And you know, you've often heard it said, you know, that an actuary or any professional goes out and meets with a prospective client, and the client says, "Can you do this for us?" And then the knee-jerk reaction is, "Well, yes." You sell the project. Then you go back to the shop and you figure out how you're going to do it. I know that that's kind of a funny example, and we all kind of joke about it, and we never want to portray ourselves as being able to do a project that we can't take on and do extraordinarily well. But the metaphor that comes with that sort of joke or that line, I think is truly valid, though, in response to your question. The opportunities are just about everywhere. You know, I see the actuarial skill set as being more than simply the capacity to perform an actuarial evaluation of a pension plan. The actuarial skill set goes way beyond that, and it actually lends itself to all kinds of problems and problem solving. To be more granular, one of the things that I've always enjoyed in my international work is talking to actuaries from other countries, and a vignette that pops into my mind is talking to a pretty senior actuary from the UK, who's a good friend of mine. I worked with him on a committee 10 years ago. We become very good friends, and I see him whenever I get to London, and which hasn't been in a while. But I said to him once, I says, you know, this goes back a couple of years, but I talked about the buyout market and the longevity hedging market and all these kinds of innovations. And I said, yeah, boy, you guys in the UK, you actuaries in the UK, you know, you touch investments unlike how we do in the United States, and you do all this innovative stuff. You really push the envelope, and we're always playing catch up in the United States. And he said to me, he says, well, Tom, it's interesting that you say that you have that perspective. He says, but I see it differently. I say, yes, it is true that we maybe innovate here. And maybe you guys in the US are 2 or 3 years behind us, maybe 4 or 5 years behind us on occasion. He says, but we UK actuaries would do anything to have access to your marketplace and your opportunities, because we may nurture these ideas and kick them off the ground. You guys take them and run with them and make them work and take them into levels that we could never dream of. That was really an interesting perspective for me, because while I'm always scanning to see where the innovation is and wondering who's doing it better than I'm doing it, and what are they doing that I'm not doing, or what are they seeing that I'm not seeing, what we have in the United States is a terrific market. We've got the best market for actuarial services in the world. And so rather than look elsewhere for the opportunities, it's caused me to appreciate more how robust our markets are here in the United States, and how much our markets appreciate what actuaries bring to the table. You know, I've always admired some of the actuaries that sort of allegedly leave the profession to take on non-actuarial jobs. But I don't see them as leaving the profession and taking on non-actuarial jobs. I see them as taking their actuarial skill sets into broader and more diverse areas. And so I see them as leaders and not abandoners, if you will. And I see them as folks we should pay attention to and listen to and learn from.
Oh, I love that, and I relate to that on so many levels. And I really like what you said there about people that quote unquote leave the profession. They're not leaving the profession. I mean, anyone I think that's been an actuary for enough years is taking that skill set with them and just applying it to a new arena. Now, I want to read something from your bio that's on your website, on the Terry Group's website. It says that you have, quote, a strong interest in bridging the considerable gap between modern analytics and cutting-edge actuarial science, in both traditional and non-traditional industries and applications. Can you elaborate on that? Tell me what you're thinking by that. I mean, I think you've kind of given some indication of that, but elaborate on that a little bit for us.
Okay, well, we actuaries are trained to build models. Now, sometimes those models are built by others, and we tailor those models to facilitate the work that we have at hand. Those models could be massive valuation systems, they could be spreadsheet models, they could be all kinds of models, but we actuaries build models. And I explain to people who wonder what actuaries do, I say, well, we build models to replicate more complex systems. Your big system, complicated, we build a model that is a mirror or a metaphor for the system where you can run the model repeatedly. You can stress test situations or models and so forth by running these models. Well, there's an analogy, I think, into bigger systems, because I think what actuaries are trained to do is to understand systems and how systems work and how there are inputs to the system, outputs from the systems, managing the systems. We're very good systems people. The skill set that I think that we can bring to other areas is where the typically siloed worlds lose out when the silos don't speak to one another or coordinate with one another. And let's take data analytics and actuarial science, or traditional actuarial science, as a classic example, particularly in the life insurance space. As I've done my international work and spoken with international regulators and so forth, there's a great degree of suspicion around artificial intelligence and the capacity of artificial intelligence to sort of hoodwink the regulators and to introduce socially unacceptable biases into a pricing algorithm or a modeling, a reserving algorithm, and pull one over on the regulators. My conversation with regulators is that that's not how actuaries work. And I said that, the artificial intelligence, big data, data science, and all the rest of it in the hands of the unwashed, unprofessional, they'll do anything to sort of skirt around the edges of propriety. Actuaries don't do that. And I think our capacity to understand and appreciate and know how data can be used well or misused, I think, is a skill set that we need to promote more. Another kind of gap that I see us filling as actuaries and that I orient to myself is in, well, a one that's come up that so many of us probably on this, listening to this, is in the healthcare area. The pandemic, I was speaking to the head of a healthcare association just over 9 months ago, but last summer, I think. And I said, I observed that the differences between what I'll call public health and institutional health, there was always sort of a fissure or a little bit of a crack between the two, public health and institutional health. And I said, the pandemic has opened up that crack and revealed enormous gaps in our healthcare delivery in the United States. And I don't need to go into that today and what that means, all the health equity issues that have just been coming to the surface. And my challenge to all of us that work in that space is to what are we doing? What are our clients doing? What are our employers doing to address those cracks, those gulfs, those canyons that have opened up? And actuaries can and should be, dealing in, because we see it more so than those that are in the silos, particularly those of us in the consulting field. And, the CCA being a consulting-based organization, we have the capacity, I think, to sort of bridge those gaps and to sort of help others see what we're seeing more clearly so that those gaps can be addressed.
And because you brought it up, I want to pick your brain a little bit on this. We see, I think, especially within the profession, that there's a lot of competition right now, skill set wise, between actuaries and, say, people that are going to school right now to become data scientists, right? So they're going and maybe getting computer science degrees. They're looking how to mine through data. What do you see as the big differentiators, and especially the things that actuaries can bring to the table, and maybe the things that they have to learn from the data scientists? But when you're comparing and contrasting those two different professions that are very similar in nature, what do you see as the big differences?
Well, I see the data scientist as not a profession, but a trade, if you will. And I'm going to make a distinction here because we are, as actuaries, a profession, which means that we hold ourselves, without regard to a code of conduct or practice standards, we hold ourselves to a higher standard. We hold ourselves, I think, to a standard of understanding that we don't want to weaponize data and use it counterproductively, that we have a responsibility to deploy our skill sets appropriately, deploy those skill sets well and towards the greater good. And sure, that means, we all work for commercial organizations or governments that have an agenda to pursue and so forth. And yet within that agenda, we still, as professionals, have a job to do. And that job is it is articulated and codified in the code of professional conduct and in our practice standards and so forth. But the standards to which we hold ourselves, I think, are the differentiator. You know what? Those that learn tools and algorithms, the data scientists, they're smart, they're good, they're valuable. We can and should be learning to work with them better and acquire some of those skill sets ourselves. We just have to remember that we hold ourselves to a different standard. We hold ourselves to a standard. And that's not to say that individuals are not a lesser grade individual. That's not it at all. But we as professionals, we have a responsibility to each other as a professional community. By the way, you're addressing something that I'll just say another 30 seconds on, Mike, about the training and the onboarding of actuaries in our profession. Because admittedly, I could get a computer science degree, a bachelor's degree, and Google will gobble me up, and you're Amazon or somebody, and I'm off to a great job. Why is it that someone should take the career path of an actuary that's admittedly longer and more arduous? And it's a question I think that the CAS and the SOA are wrestling with. If they're not, I'd be shocked, but I know that they're wrestling with those questions. I've been a proponent of for some time. This is just my own personal idea, that we ought to lessen the upfront education burden so that we bring more people in, but increase the continuing education responsibility so that we truly become a learning profession. We can onboard more people, but more rigorously educate and hold actuaries to a lifelong learning standard that allows us to profess to the world that we are current and up to date on what's needed by society, by our skill set. But we don't turn people off up front by suggesting to them that there's a 5, 6, 7, 8 year road, pathway to becoming an actuary.
Yeah, and then that's a really interesting point, and many people might not know, especially those that are maybe mid-career or younger within the profession, that continuing education really didn't become a thing until about 15 years ago within the profession itself. Like, you got your credential and then that was it. And there was trainings and everything, but nothing was required. Nothing forced you to go and sit down and actually learn something new or be a part of it. So I really like that idea. I think that's very interesting in terms of bringing more people in and then just requiring more of them to learn over time. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, I'll add one more thing to that, Mike. The question is, well, oh, horrors, if we bring more people in, then that dampens compensation levels or whatever. I've never believed that. I've always believed that what we do is we create more demand. More of us will, there's a spiral up opportunity that's there. Nothing is easy, nothing is certain, but it's just a theory that I have that more of us would do us good.
No, I think that's great. I appreciate that insight.